Well then, hi. In case you were tuning in last night, my name is Browning. I'm joined by a fellow DM and player today, Alex. Alex, how you doing?
Hi.
And yeah, I guess today we are going into detail concerning world building. Both of us are going to be taking it from a Dungeons and Dragons perspective, but it should be just fine regardless. All right. Alex, you and I have both put effort into kind of designing and creating our own races that we've used in our campaigns and settings. I guess one of the first things I'm going to ask you then is just what's some of the biggest inspirations for how you've set up these characters and how these races interact with one another?
Well, I guess it varies just because of the fact that when I make a world, it kind of just stems from one core concept.
Right.
Like for the Avianine, it was just the fact that it was Burb Dog with a floof tail because I wanted it. And then the bat ears came in later. But
sure.
but inspirations, typically I don't really have particular inspirations just because I watch a lot of anime and it's hard to pinpoint which ones are which, but it's yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the angle that I was more shooting for and kind of hoping for was how from like a cultural angle. Like you've made last night, I think we got to see a couple of your different races in the Avianines,
yes.
and the demigods and the Dracothrope played by Spectral. But as far as culturally speaking, where did you get the inspiration for how they behave and interact with one another? From like a cultural angle, yeah.
So culturally, if one of the more easier ones I can explain is for the thropes that I made for those, the Dracothrope, the Lycanthropes, the Vespertiliathropes, and the Multithropes, they all are derived from folklore in general. So like the Vespertiliathropes are like vampires, Dracothropes are dragons, and the Multithropes are like witches and stuff. So those are kind of like the typical like the typical interactions between those that are depicted in media, and then I just put like a spin on them. So like so like the witches and the vampires and the werewolves, the lycanthropes and the vespertiliothropes, they clash a lot, but in this instance it's more of territorial disputes because the lycanthropes are very territorial while the other ones are more of we kind of take what we want.
For sure.
And it's kind of like I usually just go with like a clash of how I envision them to kind of be. And like with the Avianine, it's more or less just me trying to find all of the little bits and pieces inside of my own cultures, and putting them together to kind of like somehow Mod Podge them together to kind of make them look cohesive.
Well, all right. No. That's cool. It's interesting getting to see the finished product as a player, and then being able to talk to the DM afterwards and figure out just how everything went together. It's like being able to see the finished Lego set and then go back in and read the instructions. From there, if you don't mind me asking another question, I wanted to maybe go into how other people can maybe start designing their own races. That's something that I've noticed that the furry fandom does a very good job of, is kind of facilitating and helping other people to find and be creative through creating their own species, for lack of a better term. I know a couple of us have sort of taken two animals and pushed them together and said, "This is me. Accept it now." The the avian being one of them. Do you have any bits of information to talk to other maybe new furries or people who are looking like, hey, a green fox just isn't vibing with me anymore. I want to pick something new and special. And do you have any advice for people who might be making their own species?
Well, making species, well, considering the only reason why I created the avian was I mashed together two animals that I really vibed with a lot, which is the birds and dogs together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really, it's so like, say, like if you were to do some kind of chimera thing,
Mm-hmm.
usually I would try and think of the most common aspects of each one of them, and then like try and put them together in that kind of instance. So like if with the avian, I literally just put on some wings and a bunch of feathers on the back of their on their backs to kind of like mesh them together, as well as like the feathers on the tail to kind of like continue that on, but then having the longer tail for that kind of thing. But in a D&D standpoint, usually, considering I'm new to that, the homebrewing bit
Doesn't matter,
of it,
it still counts.
the homebrew of it, basically, I tried to put as much as of the references and like bits and pieces that I thought were significant to the race, like the wings. In their culture, it's very, very significant to them for the reason that it's part of what makes them individuals. So that's why I decided to implement the types of wings that come with birds in general. So like the elliptical wings, the passive and active soaring, etc.
I noticed that when I was making the making my character, there were a variety of different wing types, and every avianine subrace felt unique.
And then also the social construct between them. It's the same thing with the Angelics. The Angelics are a little different just because of the fact that I've had a lot more time with them. The Angelics, because they're human and bird, they have, some of them have the bit of like the type of wing that they have and what they're known for, plus societal perks from them. So like the condor slash vulture, they have advantage on like say like on persuasion due to the fact that they are typically seen to be more dominant than everybody else due to the fact that they have bigger wings, which I think is interesting. And why I did it was the avianine are less on the size of your wings and more on the uniqueness of them, while the Angelics are more of just like, if you're bigger, you're probably going to overtake me, so I'm going to listen to you kind of thing.
That's an interesting duality. I like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so like I usually try to think about those kinds of things, what makes sense and what doesn't, and then trying to make it so it's not as OP. I know definitely, I had that issue with the Dracothrope because I wanted them to be super epic, but it's just like, just being able to turn into a dragon is kind of like a really powerful, so I had to find some way to dull it down in some.
Yeah, it might have a certain element of appeal to a very marginalized sect of society. I don't know who'd that be, wanting to turn into a dragon, but I don't know, it might appeal to somebody.
Because like the intent, it's just like with those the Dracothropes are very secluded in general. It's it's why that they are, because of the fact that they will, it's they'll think that they're too powerful and will try to take over the humankind or something. And that's kind of the focus of that. But it's like, as a player, and as a DM, it's just like, it's a little OP. So.
No, definitely. There's a fine line between creative storytelling and building, and what you need for game balance. Because as much as D&D is collaborative storytelling and a bunch of weirdos sitting around a basement deciding to make their own legends, there is a certain element of balance to it that is required for it to maintain a sense of fun. I know that in my own campaign, by the end of our little 2-year stretch, a couple of us had reached levels, because I think the level cap is a dumb idea and I refuse to follow it, that they were either deities or could kill deities very, very easily. And so being able to maintain that sense of balance and find ways to keep that threat is sometimes a little bit more important than creative storytelling. Well, I guess before we get into our next segment, Alex, do you have any questions for me concerning world building, specifically centered around the fluffy variety?
Well, I suppose I'm very interested in your rat folk
Yeah.
backgrounds behind those, just because of the fact that it's kind of a focus in our campaign currently that you're DMing for us.
The rat folk clans. For me, I've always really liked Redwall just a little too much, and it was very uncommon for me to plunk myself down in front of the TV and watch the animated series growing up. And so after I got through the kind of the growing pains of, oh, this is Dungeons and Dragons, and this is how I homebrew things, and this is the nitty gritty behind the very sometimes polished product that I put out onto the table, I began to kind of experiment with making my own races. And the first one I did was a species of bipedal rat called ratfolk. And I took elements that I knew of genuine rat culture and like how rats behave as a society when they're not 3 feet tall and holding guns. And I put that into their people. So for me, one of the big things was how often rats chitter. And because of that, I made the rat folk language, Ratish, a very fast-paced and very complicated series of chitters and noises. And it became kind of common for everybody to sort of speak on top of one another. And from there, I developed a kind of a way of saying I love you, which is actually taking a break and letting somebody else finish their thought before you start to speak and bring up your perspective from things. I made sure that everybody... It was a very socially inclusive race. Everybody kind of worked together, and that they were based around clans. And from there, I decided that I wanted to have fun with it. Hello there, Tempo.
Hi.
Hey, good to hear from you, man. How you doing?
In my discussions with the panelist on the previous panel, I had gotten all thrown off by time zones.
That is acceptable.
Okay.
We're glad you're here anyway. We got into the stream and you weren't here, and I'm like, I'll just keep
I was
going.
literally just there. Like I left and I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't even left my computer. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool. So hi, I'm Tempo. I'm your guest of honor.
Hi, Tempo.
All right, so you guys have already introduced yourselves, I assume?
Yeah. Yes, we have.
All right, where are we at?
We are we have gone over Alex's avianine race. We are currently going over the Ratfolk race I have invented for my D&D campaign, and we're going over what makes these races culturally significant within the settings, as well as the creative process we had setting them up and coming up with them. And I just kind of finished that Ratfolk. I based heavily on real life rats and how they interact as a society, and then I decided I wanted to have fun with it. I've always been kind of a fan of a duality sort of thing, and so I set up sewer rats and wild rats to kind of have a confronting perspective of things. Wild rats living out in the woods or the fields and really not bothering with cities, and sewer rats taking up refuge in sewers and really focusing and honing a sense of poison craft. And from there, I kind of set up a bit of a conflict between the two sub races, where one doesn't think one is fit to live because look at how dirty they are and they give us a bad name, and the other thinks one isn't fit to live because they haven't had to struggle the way we have, and it's just devolved into something of a sub race civil war.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's for me, that's most of the process for creating rats. I just picked up things that I liked from popular media and then slapped them on top of a kind of an anthropomorphized version of what I've experienced raising rats on my own. So
Yeah, like don't just go by like what cartoons show you rats are like.
Oh, exactly. No, that's I currently have two rats. Ed and Curie are just in the room over. Ed is a little potato, and he's a complete moron. I love him. Curie is considerably skinnier and a lot smarter than I give her credit for, and she is just as wonderful. And being able to see how they interact between the two, between each other, has been really helpful in the creative process for making the actual race.
Yeah. When I was starting out with my current book, I knew that I wanted to have it's a Robin Hood book, and so I'm like I knew I wanted to have it focus on creatures that are native to the British Isles, and so
For sure.
yeah, I was like, okay, well, what's around? What could I do? And I was like, okay, otters. Like I've had otters in other stories, but what are otters like in medieval times? In this setting? And so I decided that like the otters, like these river otters have essentially like almost a parallel system of land usage, where like in a lot of places in medieval Europe, like people had control over the streams within their like area, like the land usage was centered around bodies of water, whereas in this one I'm like, okay, well, the otters actually have those, like the otters have the right to those streams, and like they then can lease them out and whatever, because it's very difficult to remove the otters from the water, like if they want to have it, like because they can just like outswim you and stuff, and if you chase them away, they'll just come back and stuff like that. And so like then, and if you try to build a mill on their river without their permission, they'll just burn it down or something, because like, and then they'll disappear again.
Otters, I can get behind this.
Right. And so
Yes.
So I was like, saboteurs, and I had this idea that the otters have an agreement where like they get a certain amount of the riverbank, but how do you determine that in a society that doesn't have tape measures? How do you say how much of this land is the bank and how much of it is just a field near the bank? And the solution I came up with was they own a stone's throw of land from the water, but you have to be standing in the water when you throw the stone, and you can't use anything special to throw the stone.
Does the strongest member of the tribe count as something special?
Right, yeah. So you get a special shiny rock that you then get to throw, and there's much debate about what's the best kind of shiny rock, and what's the best way to throw it. And these seem like very otter cultural attributes to have, like, oh no, that pebble's nothing, you should see this pebble. And we have a really good pebble. I found this pebble the other day. And so like, but what this does is it means that there's like a definite drop off of what counts at like it's just almost impossible to get stones to go further than X distance from that, from your starting point when you're just throwing them. And so there is an easily repeatable way of measuring no matter where you are. And so like And so I made sure to include that in the story, and this also had a bunch of knock-on effects, like the otters are the main suppliers of tin, because in England the place you get tin is in streams.
I didn't
Like you
know
pan
that.
for it like you pan for gold, but you can't really like dig it up because it's not like in large concentrations in England.
Yeah.
But it's really spread out, and so they would pan for it. And otters would be good at that because, you know, they just like get in there and like, oh yeah, I'm like wiggling around and using a pan that's got water and dirt in it, and, you know, like looking for special dirt. But like the thing is, the otters don't they don't have sufficient like woodland to process the tin into, you know, like the tin ore into tin, and they don't have like, you know, they aren't really like built for, so they have like for like metallurgy, because they have webbing, so they have limited like manual dexterity, and so like they trade this for other things, and that's like I used that as the basis for like other interdependencies within this multi-species culture. Like, we need the otters to get the tin. It's to our advantage to let the otters do their thing in their habitat because they're better at getting the tin than we are. You know, not just, and like the same thing with the fish or whatever. And then similarly, like, you know, the you know, the badgers, you know, dig things up. Oh, well, that's where we get clay.
Okay.
You know, and like the badgers, you know, like otters need things that are made of, you know, ceramic sometimes, but they, you know, don't really have a good setup to do it, and so they trade, you know, different chunks of the society have different things that they are conventionally suited to. So like the bats are like the bats own everything above the height of the the bats own all territory above like 5 stories up.
Okay.
So if you can build a tower that's taller than that, the bats own the top floor.
Huh.
And so the bats then like will lease like a tiny little chunk of land from someone and build a tower on it that has no stairs. And there are no rooms in the bottom 4 or 5 stories. It's just solid. And then at the top, there's like a nice little like hotel room, and they land in it and hang out, and then they continue on their way because they're messengers. Like a lot of them are like messengers, and the reason that I arrived at that for the bats is I'm like, okay, bats are uniquely skilled but fragile. And so you don't want to, as a bat, be in a situation where people are going to say, oh no, a bat, and shoot arrows at you because they think you're going to come and drop a torch on their castle from above. Because I didn't want to redesign castles to protect them from bats. And because then they're unrecognizable, then they're domes or something. And
the Air Force of the medieval era.
Right, yeah. And so I was like, okay, how can I avoid having the bats be that way? And then I came up with this like idea that you can't hire bats to fight for you. And like no one, you know, the bats also are disinclined to like work for a particular, like they're just freelance messengers essentially. Like they have like a guild, and they're like, okay, yeah, we're gonna be freelance messengers, and like we'll take any message to anyone, but and everyone knows not to shoot us down on the way because obviously our message could be to your benefit. You don't know. And you know, in return they are immune to any call to conscription or anything like that because they can't be, you know, like they can't be involved because that would mean that like, oh, suddenly we can't have messengers at all. And so like, but they also can't own land below 5 stories up.
For sure.
And so like they'll have like signal towers and things, but they can't have like houses that they own. They'd have to like rent them. And so stuff like that, having it in the society having their role in the society be heavily dependent upon their physiology, I find really interesting. Because like
definitely
right, like because then you can have like, oh, you show up and the innkeeper is a bat, and isn't that weird? Oh, okay, well that means that this, you know, it works this way, you know, or oh, a bat has showed up, they must have a message or something.
I think the way I did world building and designing in my own setting was kind of I assumed that everybody grew up in rather segregated sects, and so I built cultures centered around how the race kind of behaves in a little bit of pop culture, but as well as how it behaves in nature. And it was kind of on accident, but a lot of the fluffy races that I've designed have rather tribal structures. But I thought it would be a little interesting to see how the cultures clashed when they met one another. And I put effort into designing different quirks of races that don't really mesh well with the rest of society because they grew up in a rather insular environment. For example, with raccoons, raccoons' definition of property ownership is a little looser. Like if you can get to it and take it from someone, then it's yours. If they wanted it that bad, they would have put effort into keeping it safe. And so for them, they look at things just like lying around that might be outside someone's house. Let's say a broom. They're walking down the street and go, "Oh, this broom is nice." And they pick up the broom and walk away with it. And to them, it's just, "Oh, there was a broom outside. Nobody was watching the broom. Now the broom is mine. This is how this works." Whereas if you walk out one day and your broom is missing and you see this little raccoon trotting off down the street holding your broom, you're going to get upset. And then there's going to be this little argument between broom owner and broom new owner trying to, come to a consensus between a cultural misunderstanding. Or with rat folk and the language of kind of constantly interrupting each other, if they're speaking common to somebody normally, like at a bar, the rat folk is going to keep interrupting this person just because that's how they're used to talking. And I know with me specifically, if somebody keeps interrupting me when I'm trying to communicate to them, it gets annoying. And after a while, I'm just going to snap and tell them to shut up. And now the rat feels offended because, "Oh, I was just talking and having a conversation with you, and now you're getting mad at me." And they kind of devolve from there.
Yeah, and like
Sorry.
Gesundheit.
I think that the idea of these different, like, just biologically, like, these different species arose in specific locales is relatively reasonable. And then, like, over time they've linked up and more of them have interacted. I tend to, just for the sake of my own sanity, have a cats can breed with cats, rats can breed with rats policy about the species in the setting, just so that mathematicians don't complain about my books. Because if I say, okay, he's a wolf, but he's part coyote, but he's like 90% wolf, so therefore everyone treats him as a wolf, like that's really both like a biologist and a sociologist would just tell you, yeah, functionally, then yeah, you're just a wolf.
Yeah, exactly.
Because like really a lot of the strict are you a tiger, are you whatever in my setting would be something more defined by like, what do you look like, what do you act like, what do people treat you like, which is how ethnicity works, and lots of aspects of identity work in our world. Like if you look like you're from a background and you act like you're from a background and people treat you that way, it's effectively true. Like that's as true as it is going to get.
So perception is reality sort of thing.
Well, right, especially when it comes to social constructs like that. Like, are you a member of, the antelope tribe? Well, if you look like an antelope and you act like an antelope and everyone treats you like one, it doesn't matter if you're actually like, I don't know, part mule deer. You will, you are an antelope. And so like, one thing that one tool that I've found really useful is that site World Anvil.
Yeah, no, a couple of my friends use World Anvil.
I do. That's what I use my that's where I had my stat sheets for the monsters I used last night for.
So for those of you who aren't in the know, in the audience, World Anvil is basically like I would probably describe it as like a private wiki like you have your own personal wiki, and you can just add articles and information and pictures to it for whatever setting you want to make. And it asks you prompts like, what is this species, what are their priorities, what is their physiology, what's their history, stuff like that, what are common names.
For sure.
And then they, from there, have, like, how do you guys use World Anvil? Like, what do you guys do with it?
Alex, you go.
Well, mostly right now I've got all of my stat blocks for different species and stuff like that, but it's mostly a place where I can keep all of my information and kind of pinpoint what I need to like know in order, especially for like a campaign. Like I've got a couple articles I'm writing right now for a couple of the places that my players are going to be encountering, the main ones. It's I use it mostly for that purpose of like organizing all of the characters and the information that I need for my campaign.
All right. I know for me, what I've mostly used World Anvil for has been lineages. I've placed a lot of emphasis on the specific characters and really gotten my players to really interact with them and kind of fall in love with them. And then I want to see where these characters' lives go. And so I've really used World Anvil, not so much from a world building quote unquote perspective, but from what is the Greenleaf clan doing 20 or 30 years down the road from now?
Yeah, I find that I use it to store information so that it doesn't have to sit in my brain. Like, I'll come up with a cool idea for how something could work, like the otters having everything within a stone's throw. Well, I'll put the rules for that in World Anvil under the otter entry, and say, okay, well, this is how it works for these guys, and then I can go back and reference that when I'm writing the book, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's consistent, and then, 10 years later, I'm writing a sequel, let's say, I can go back and say, what was the rule there? Oh, it's this. Because otherwise, I find that I have, like, some drift. Like, I've had a different idea in the interim, or, like, the idea slowly morphed in my head, and then suddenly I am, writing a subsequent adventure with the same setting, and I say it works a different way, and I don't give any explanation of why it would have changed. And that's that's gonna pull someone out of the zone. Like they're gonna not be in the moment anymore if they notice an error like that. They're gonna, oh wait, what? Why is that?
Yeah, the rules have broken for the setting.
Yeah. So like another thing that I really like to think about in furry world building is how societal structures are different and how physical structures are different. So like physical structures, it's relatively straightforward. You just have to like keep taking notes on weird little things that would be different. Like I'm currently in medieval mode because I'm writing this Maid Marian book, but like the deer, when they make swords, the handguards of the swords are pointing forward like antlers.
Oh, cool.
Because they're like, well, obviously I need to catch the other guy's, sword because it's basically another antler, and I need to like stop it from hitting me, and then I need to knock it away. Well, whereas like, other characters would have a more conventional kind of, sword, like, and whereas like otters think swords are stupid. Otters think swords are ridiculous. Why would you ever have a sword? You should have a spear if spear floats. Like,
yeah.
And like the, like other things like, no matter who's sitting on the throne, they have a crown that has antlers, because one of the main dynasties is a deer family, but like they keep and we're getting into the social side now. Like they marry other important, powerful houses, and for political stability reasons, and those aren't always deer. And so like currently, like the previous king and queen were a weasel and a deer, and we needed a way for them to have a succession. And so, because otherwise it just, the whole point of the monarchy is that it should always be really obvious who's going to be next in line, so that you don't need to have a war about it. And
I don't know, those sound like fun sometimes.
Right. And so I had this idea that the like both parties then have like an official on contract basically like surrogate parent who has like an official capacity. They're basically like a godparent, but they're like a surrogate parent of the correct corresponding species. And this is like a thing that you have for like among the nobility as like a political alliance. Like, I'm not going to marry you, but that's the consolation prize is that you can be the surrogate for my my spouse's kid or whatever it is, so that you are the correct species. We're gonna make this happen. And then whichever,
that's interesting.
Right, whichever one of them they then both parties typically start at the same time and go, okay, well, we're gonna both we'll see who has kids first and whatever, and then they're just, those kids are adopted by both parents, and they say, okay, well, you're the firstborn, you're the secondborn, whatever, that's their order of succession. It doesn't matter what biological species you are, you are next.
Definitely.
And then like among the commoners though, it's a lot more freeform. Like, oh well, yeah, like I'm gonna just have so and so come in and be a surrogate parent, and we'll put him up for the year or whatever it takes for this to happen successfully. And like there are probably weird like local conventions for what you're supposed to do. Like, oh yeah, like I gave so and so a basket of the most obscene looking carrots that we grew this year as like part of the proposal for them to come and be the surrogate. Like, whatever it is. And like that means that you can have situations where like Marion is a noble and Robin's a commoner, and she just assumes that everyone just assumes that at some point she's going to have him just be a surrogate for her instead of like actually marrying him. Like, oh yeah, you'll be my +1, and you'll be like, the rest of the time we'll just have you be a valet or something.
That could lead to some rather interesting misunderstandings.
Right, yeah, and it all springs from like the presence of multiple species who have to operate in one space.
For sure.
And so stuff like that, like having in the modern setting, I have like, the dogs, for example, like think everyone else's idea of ghosts is ridiculous because you can't smell them.
Okay.
But then they'll be like, oh yeah, so-and-so is a real, so-and-so's a psychic. They're a fortune smeller. Like they'll smell you and know what your destiny is going to be.
I love it.
Right? Like, because like to dogs, like that's like the primary thing. Like, oh, ooh, wow. And like the dogs have their own social media app that cats made for them to get them off of social media called Howl. And it's all like radius based. And so like you can transmit anonymously from where you are to a radius to everybody within that radius, and it'll say like, I have found this tennis ball. Here is a picture.
Oh dear.
That is hilarious. I love it.
Like obviously someone liked this tennis ball because it has been chewed on a lot, see? And like oh, someone should come here so that we can go, get the 2-for-1 pizza deal, because I can't eat 2 pizzas, but I could totally eat a pizza at half price. And then like 5 other dogs show up. And that's like what they want out of social media, and so it's different from what everybody else wants, which is like what more conventional. And so like a dog might have a social media account on the other services, but very few non-canines have accounts on this.
Okay.
Interesting.
I like it. Dealing in a D&D setting, social media really hasn't come up. We've just gotten into how radio works, and it was basically hand waved away with "Don't worry about it." And so it's really interesting to get to hear a perspective of social media from an anthropomorphic perspective. I like that. That's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, but the origin of that, like how I developed that was I just thought well, if I were making social media for a dog, how would it be different? What would radically change? Oh, well, they would care more about proximity because they are thinking of it like literally howling.
Right.
It would be anonymous because it's like howling. They would, or whatever. And it's highly transitory. They don't bother storing these messages. Because why would you want to go back and read about how 5 years ago someone found a tennis ball? That doesn't store on your phone. Maybe you could get it from the server. But, and so, things like that. I had this, just other weird stuff like that. Even just the otters in Windfall which is the modern series that I have. They drive people are constantly marketing aquatic cars to them.
For sure.
Cars that are boats, because they're well, I'm not going to buy a car that's not a boat, like a chump. What if I need to drive across the water? And so they have these, amphicars and things, and are oh yeah, obviously, why wouldn't I have that? And all of the non-otters are oh my god, we're all gonna drown. Why would we possibly want a car that is a bad boat? And they're well, obviously, if it sinks, you just swim to the shore. You're an otter, just swim back. Who cares if it sinks? Same thing with the flying machines were invented by bats, because oh well. If it crashes, just get out of it. If it's going to crash, just leave it, and it'll crash, and then you can land safely over there and look at it and see why it crashed.
I'm
big
sorry,
deal.
I'm a pilot, and so getting to hear that, just leave, they'll find out why it crashed later. It's just kind of funny.
Yeah, it's okay, just get out of it, and then you can watch it crash and see why it crashed. And it's fine.
Yeah, go down and check it out, pop the hood. Oh, that's
right.
fine.
Oh no, it crashed because of this. Oh no. I didn't have enough flap in the wings. And we'll need to bring it back to the shop and put more flaps in the wings.
All right. Huh.
Yeah, and so
I really go on.
Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say that I like how you've put a lot of effort into not necessarily anthropomorphizing the animals, but also anthropomorphizing the world around them, and making it really fit them, rather than just kind of and now the foxes drive cars, and this is how it works. You've put a lot of effort and time into figuring out, no, but what kind of cars are they, or what kind of vehicles do they use, what kind of social media do they use, what kind of how is their clothing different, how are their houses built differently based on what they need as a species. I really like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, cars, you have bigger cars for rhinos, but you also have everything in it is made of stamped steel plate, and everything's covered in rhino liner. That spray on high impact plastic lining.
Yeah,
everything's covered in that. Oh, okay, because as a rhino, you're just gonna eventually destroy conventional materials.
Definitely.
That sort of stuff. In another setting of mine that's a modern setting, the characters work at an ergonomics company. For anthros, like they work at like, how do you, oh yeah, we have to figure out a way to make a keyboard that you can type on with hooves, but also, it's optimized. You can change it out and you can type on it with, regular paws.
Oh, all right. So how would you do that?
You'd have to have like swappable keypads, or you'd have like an apparatus where you stick your fingers into tubes and you can move them up, down, left, right, forward to hit different letters. But like, things like, oh no, this platypus, we need to have this apartment isn't rated for platypi because we don't have a Faraday cage installed in the walls to block all the EM pollution from the people around you. And so otherwise it'll wake you up every time that your neighbor's running a blender.
For sure.
Huh. And and then you go upstairs and you hit him with your one poison claw.
Oh, yeah, that's
it's one of those. You got to watch out for that. And so like same thing with like bat houses. Like when you're showing apartments to bats, you have to be like, okay, obviously you have a great deck area and there's a lock. The key for the front door is also the key to the patio door. And thus you can land here and whatever. And you also get access to the roof communally for, renting this top floor apartment because you're bats.
Yeah. Nobody else is going to want to use it. That's kind of your zone.
Yeah. And so that sort of thing, like, you go to a bar that's set up for bats and like, the usually relatively aesthetic steel piping on the ceiling is actually strong enough for you to like dangle from and have drinks.
Yeah, and that could also kind of serve as a way to increase floor space, because if you cater to both bats and everybody else, then the bats kind of have their exclusive area of the club, and now you can double capacity and then
talk to the fire marshal, but yeah.
Oh, they'll be fine. They can fly out.
Yeah. And so
yes.
Go ahead. So like what are I would say like one more thing before we go, like what are your favorite adaptations to anthropomorphism that you see in settings, like in just work that you've seen, like Zootopia or something, or what have you?
It's been a while since I've last seen Zootopia. I don't know if that revokes my furry card or not. But I would say it would probably be the scale that Zootopia was at. It never felt like one race stuck out too much in somebody else's portion. It felt like everybody had put enough time and effort into figuring out how would this genuinely work? How would we make this function as a society? And so the fact that rodents kind of had a very small portion of the city that was fine for their scale, but everybody else was like a colossus in. And that the bigger animals had larger homes that were perfectly fine for them, but if you're a smaller race, like say a rabbit and a fox, I don't know where I pulled those from, you walk in and it's going to be a very large kind of cavernous living space that isn't going to be very comfortable at all. And so just that basic sense of size and everything being proportional based on who built it, I found to be very, very interesting.
What about you, Alex? Like, what's a cool accommodation for anthros you've seen in some book or movie or anime or whatever? Or what's something that just made them feel like, what's some moment that made characters feel, non-human to you?
I think I feel like I'm not in particular with how Zootopia depicts those kind of things, just because of the fact.
Just anything.
Like I'm trying to think, because I'm also making a comparison. With Zootopia, it's more of a optimistic view on how that would work. While I think my favorite would probably be with Beastars, just because of the fact that I'm also not big about the variation in size with Zootopia, just because of the fact that it's an interesting concept. It's just that I feel like in Beastars they did a little bit better job of doing the kind of like scaling between the different animals, just because of the fact that it's just like they're not super duper tall like the giraffes in Zootopia, but they also had more of a realism to the fact that they're still animals. While in Zootopia they were more humanized in the way that they don't have those animal instincts anymore and were only brought about because some herbivores put them in that position. I feel like those kinds of things, as having those animalistic natures in the actual creatures themselves, while trying to make it work to kind of interact with each other, while also keeping their dietary needs in the same vein, is actually really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Oh.
My one that springs to mind is probably Wind in the Willows. As my like favorite accommodation for anthropomorphism, because
It's been forever
like
since I've seen that.
yeah, like I've watched the stop motion TV series of that, which is actually super funny and has like the voice actor for Wallace from Wallace and Gromit in it, and like people like that in
now I
it.
got
Yeah, it's
something
super
to
fun.
look up.
And but like in that one, like the moles live in hobbit holes. The river rats live like in basically like house/docks. You know, the badgers also live in hobbit holes, just bigger ones. But like Toad lives in a sprawling Edwardian manor, except that everything is toads. Like the suits of armor are made for toads, the portraits are all toads, the like anytime there would be like a a symbol of a handprint or something, it's a toad print. Like things like that. I'm super into it because like in the TV show they had to like it's stop motion, so they use a lot of like props from like dollhouses and things, but they can't reuse a lot of stuff and have to make it custom since they're all animals.
For sure.
And so they can, they had to like manually make all these little suits of armor that could fit over Toad to put around his house. They had to paint tiny paintings of a Toad in like a ruffled collar to put up on his walls. And like, to me, that's what makes it feel a lot more, real, like a lot more anthro, even though the characters themselves in Wind in the Willows basically just act like humans. Like they don't, really act that differently. Like Mole once in a while will like smell something no one else smells or something like that, or Rat will, swim better than other characters, but like most of the time, you guys have seen Wind in the Willows in some form, like they basically act like people. And so having those characters have at least like their trappings, like their preferences for how they live, be heavily influenced by it, even though it's like within the range of humanoids. Like we don't question that. It's not insane to us that the hobbits would like to live in, a nice underground, heavily insulated, cozy space with their garden on top. That's not completely absurd to a human, because the hobbits are basically humans. And so like it's within the range of something a human could do, but it's calibrated to their anthro-species.
For sure. Definitely. Well, I like that.
So yeah, I totally recommend the stop motion Wind in the Willows. That one is surprisingly fun as an adult to watch.
Definitely. I'll have to look into that later today. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for the recommendation. I appreciate that. Sure.
But yeah, so does that about anyone else have any final things you want to throw in, or?
I remember this just as Alex gets started, but I think another form of anthropomorphism that's been kind of adapted is tail bags, like saddlebags that those with tails can kind of wear. I've seen it specifically with dragons, but backpacks that are for tails has always really been interesting to me. I thought that those always looked really, really cool. But other than that, no, I don't have anything else to contribite. I think we did a bang-up job of getting everything taken care of.
I do have
Yeah.
because everybody's been talking a lot. But something I kind of enjoy seeing in a lot of people's now with the digigrade shoes and stuff like that, and how I personally love trying to design outfits around wings, because it's kind of a hassle to try and figure that out with these 2 extra limbs on their back, and furniture and other things to kind of accommodate towards animals. So a bat or the avianine, they would probably have something to hang on to kind of go to bed to, for that kind of instance. I know with my species for my campaign, and normally in general they have these really comfy poles that they kind of wrap around with cloth and other things that you probably see on a bed, but it's like a pole up in the air so that they can hang from, because they kind of have some behaviors of bats in them because of the bat ears. But yeah, I appreciate those kinds of things that happen in a lot of different creations from the fandom in general, because you don't really think about that when you're doing that kind of thing, because of the fact that you don't really think about the technicalities of how that would work on let's say a bird for clothes.
For sure.
So
definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. I think I don't have anything else to mention. Alex, Tempo, anything else?
I think we got it.
Awesome. All righty then. In that case, I think we are good to wrap this little panel up. Thank you to everybody who listened in and listened to us ramble on about world building and making life easier for animals. And I think that'll just about do it. Everybody have a wonderful day and enjoy the con.
Thank you so much, Tempo, Alex, and Browning. That was the world building panel. Up next, we have attending IRL conventions with Miran. We will begin that in just a few minutes.
Silver Gattoman, he bought me a coffee. Silver Gattoman, here is the song for thee. He likes to video all the panels at the cons. You should go and watch them whether they are short or long. Silver Gattoman, you video that's not a jibe. All of you go to his YouTube channel and like and subscribe.